Ottawa's special rapporteur is pushing back against accusations his work is biased. David Johnston on Tuesday faced 3 hours of questions before a House of Commons committee. His appearance comes weeks after his interim report on foreign interference in Canada's elections was released.
The evidence that we had before us that permitted us to come to the conclusion you've just suggested was what was available to us at that time.
His report found serious shortcomings in how intelligence is shared and in how prepared the government is to fight countries looking to interfere in Canadian democracy. But critics say Johnston's work didn't go far or deep enough. They also say Johnston is unfit for the job because of connections to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, Johnston says his work has never been compromised. He says the public hearings he'll conduct this summer will get to solutions faster than a public inquiry. So for more on this, we have brought together a panel of political strategists. Joining us from Montreal is Jason Leader. He's a Conservative strategist and president of Enterprise Canada. In Ottawa, Liberal commentator Carleen Verheyen. She's also Associate Vice President at Summa Strategies. And in Vancouver, we have NDP commentator Raj Sahota. She is in BC and Vice President at Strategies 360. Welcome to all three of you.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, so Carleen, I'll start with you. I'm wondering, there were some questions that somewhat went unanswered in terms of what we heard yesterday from David Johnston, not only during the course of that committee hearing and his testimony, but also in that exclusive interview that Power and Politics had. For example, that he didn't actually call to have a conversation with Han Dong, who has been implicated in all of this. Do you think, looking at this objectively, that there may have been some holes or some oversights in what was looked at ahead of that interim report?
Well, David Johnston was tasked and mandated to conduct an inquiry, and there was a specific scope to his mandate, and it was about investigating foreign interference writ large. I think that if there were individuals that he determined to talk to or not talk to, that would have largely been guided by what the mandate of his work was. But in terms of questions left unanswered, I think the questions themselves that were asked of him also left something to be desired. Yesterday at the committee, it was just a high point of political theater in terms of the types of totally unserious questions that you saw members of the opposition, particularly the Conservative Party, asking of David Johnston. For a group of people who claim to take foreign interference very seriously, it was really odd to see them using their time with him before committee yesterday, asking questions like whether he had supper with a young Justin Trudeau 40 years ago, or how much he earns from his pension as a former Governor General. I think the big takeaway for Canadians yesterday was that we need to take the partisanship out of this process and get back to a place where we're actually forward-looking to how we can protect Canadian institutions from more foreign interference in the future, rather than just having a go at whoever is our political target of the moment. It was a really disappointing showing yesterday.
Jason, I want to go to you on this point because it was quite clear right out of the gates that we were getting a lot of questions from the Conservative members of the committee that were questioning the credibility rather than questioning the investigation into foreign interference. So there was an appearance of more politicking than really productivity. Questions even on whether or not David Johnston actually wrote the report. Do you think there was an effective use of time given the fact that there was 3 hours with the special rapporteur and the subject at hand is foreign interference?
I thought it was a disappointing day, and it's not for the reason that Carleen was just talking about. I'll just give you my perspective on it, Arthi. Like when Johnston, let's go back. The Prime Minister mishandles the file so bad he has to appoint somebody to look into this, right? We need somebody to get to the bottom of this. We need somebody that's trusted, that everybody can trust to get to the bottom of this because it's so important. Foreign interference is such a big deal. So he appoints Mr. Johnston. eyebrows go up, right? He's been a member of the Trudeau Foundation, not great. He's, he knows Trudeau, or at least knew his dad, not great. But I trust Johnston. Like I'm putting myself in my position, sort of a few weeks ago, and it's like, Johnston, he'll probably do a good job with this, right? So that's where I come from this. Did he do a good job with this? Yesterday, I'm sort of watching out of one corner of my eye while I'm working, and I hear Jagmeet Singh asking him the questions about Aaron O'Toole, and Mr. Johnston's answer is like, essentially, I didn't have that information at the time. So you're a guy who, like, we don't trust the Prime Minister to level us on this. So we've hired you to come in, look under the hood, and give us a comprehensive report. What's going on? How do we fix it? How do you not know? And whether it's CSIS's problem or his problem, how do you not know about the specific allegations or alleged interference against the leader of the opposition in the last election? Like, this isn't 3 elections ago. This is in 2019. This is the last federal election. And so I will say this, as someone who wanted to believe in Mr. Johnston and who wanted to believe he was the right man for the job and who wanted to believe that he could restore some confidence in the foreign interference stuff, I left yesterday just baffled. Like, what am I supposed to say to that, right? Like, how am I supposed to say, no, Johnston's got it under control? He had to admit a number of times, I don't have that information. It's not what I had. I haven't talked to that person. Like, you had a few weeks, ask for a couple more weeks. The Prime Minister has to give it to you. Like, write a real report that we can get behind. And all the good work he's done, which is in terms of, where interference failings are happening and who should know and how the Prime Minister's office and other intelligence agencies should handle this stuff. That's all being lost and fallen by the wayside because he can't answer the most basic questions about the most high-profile political interference or alleged political interference that we've got. That's what's disappointing, and I don't know why he can't look in the mirror and say, I've got to do a better job with this thing.
So, Raj, to that point then, I want to ask you, we saw actually the NDP leader come into committee, specifically also NDP MP Jenny Kwan, who has had briefings related to foreign interference as well. So we heard from the NDP leader disappointment in Johnston not looking at the NDP motion that had been brought forward about him being the special rapporteur. And to Jason's point here on whether or not we actually got the answers, how do you make an assessment on what you think? Do you think that the valuable work that would have come out of the report in terms of what he called significant shortcomings in handling this are being overlooked?
Well, I think I'll speak. I'm talking to you from Vancouver this morning. It's the 34th anniversary, the week of the 34th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. The demonstrations, the pro-democracy demonstrations that have always been held in Vancouver over the last 3 decades. This year, people were encouraged to wear sunglasses, hats, disguises, so they could not be identified. Identified by whom? Well, these are the very heart of the kinds of questions around the diaspora that the NDP has been trying to ask. And this is where the rubber does hit the road. We are a year and a bit out from an election. I recognize that there are timelines around this report, but the public inquiries over the summer are going to be held over the summer when most Canadians aren't paying attention. And the very people who we need to hear from may feel intimidated about participating in a public process. So I'm getting very concerned about how we move forward and make sure that Canadians have a secure election and that Canadians of the diaspora feel confident that the issues that they brought forward to their MPs. I do point out that Peter Julian, Jenny Kwan, and Jagmeet Singh are all MPs from the Vancouver area. We're talking about an Indo-Pacific strategy. There are all sorts of things where we're counting on the diaspora to deliver big for Canada, but we seem to be unable to protect the most outspoken ones amongst them from foreign interference. These are serious, serious things, and we're supposed to be dealt with by Halloween. I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Now, Raj, I want to stay with you for a moment because you've raised a really important point, and this was discussed during what we heard from David Johnston yesterday, and that was about the diaspora community and the fact that there is a lot of fear, too, when it comes to speaking out for fear of being targeted. And so, Raj, I want to ask you, what's the solution then if it appears that the special rapporteur, the suggestion of a public hearing, the report that we have seen so far, the upcoming deadline in about 5 months down the road, if that is not an effective way of dealing with this very real and very serious problem in our country right now, then what is the way forward? Do we need to get rid of David Johnston? Does there need to be a public inquiry? Will that actually allay the fears of the diaspora community, for example?
The diaspora community and other Canadians need to have confidence in the process. And I think over the last few weeks, the credibility of, now I think everyone agrees that Mr. Johnston has had strong service to our country, but his credibility has greatly been eroded by the constant questioning by the opposition parties, and that's their job to do that. And it's concerning that enough lens wasn't put on the people that would be working on this with the very serious recommendations that we're making to the Canadian public. So it does erode credibility when there are donors to one political party on staff. There could have been a better job on all of this, and it should have been taken much more seriously from the beginning. So we are in a bit of a mess. There are some timelines. Canadians don't have confidence in the process, and the election is a year and a bit away. So I think all pressure on the Liberal government to find ways to clean up this mess and move forward in a process that the opposition parties can get behind and that Canadians have confidence in.
So, Karleen, I do want to put that to you then. Certainly we have heard from the Prime Minister even himself saying that this is a very serious issue. It doesn't seem to be taken as seriously by the other parties who are politicking. But certainly, if what we witnessed yesterday, when there were questions that were about Johnston's credibility, and this has been something that it's not just one party. Parties are unified in saying this is not working, whether it is actual bias or just the appearance of bias. And, that argument is out there too. So do we just continue on this path, again, on this very serious issue where we don't actually get any meaningful solutions happening? Or at what point does the Liberal government say, okay, obviously this is a problem? Or David Johnston say, okay, I am perceived as a problem and perhaps we need to go another route here. At what point do we just keep prolonging this if this conversation is going to continue and get on with it?
Credibility is important, and as you said, foreign interference is an incredibly serious matter. The attempts at foreign interference in our democracy have been ongoing for decades by state actors like China and others. But certainly some of the revelations that have come to light in the last number of months have rightly caused concern among Canadians. And I think we do need to not only rebuild some public trust in our democratic institutions, but also ensure that whatever improvements need to be made can be made. Now, how do you do that? Let's look under the hood a little bit of how this work has been assigned to David Johnston and what the checks and balances are. His findings are, and will continue to be, as he continues his work this summer, subject to review by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, as well as NSIRA, the National Security and Intelligence Review Committee. If they have any kind of issue with his findings, if they reach different conclusions than he has, those are to be reported and stated publicly. The first committee I mentioned is a committee of parliamentarians from all political parties, all parts of the political spectrum, from the House of Commons and the Senate. So those committees also have to do their work. We have not yet heard from them anything that would call into question David Johnston's findings, and that actually matters. So I think we do have some checks and balances that we still need to sort of stress test a little bit before we allow that partisanship that I was talking about earlier, which has so undermined the work that's been conducted thus far. Before we allow that to kind of poison our impressions of the findings, I think we need to know that there are actually issues underlying the findings or the work of the investigation.
Jason, final word to you, and I do want you to respond to that because, you know, the checks and balances are important here, and part of that is the fact that we heard from David Johnston that he urges the opposition party leaders to come and take a look at all of the information that he looked at, and he even said yesterday in his opening remarks publicly state whether or not you take issue with them. Of course, there will be issues with in terms of what can be made public, in terms of specifics, but in terms of actually having access to this information, how much of this is politicking versus actual productivity if opposition leaders are saying, no, we're not even going to look at this information and check to see if what you're saying is right or wrong?
I just want to address the issue of partisanship start because you've raised it and so has Carleen and others. This is a partisan operation. We have partisan politics in Canada. And this isn't just the Conservatives, by the way, right? The Bloc Québécois, the NDP, the Conservatives are all aligned saying, you've got to do a public inquiry. Should they be looking at the information? That's an interesting question, right? Their position is, and I think it's probably the right one, give it out to people. And the problem with the government is they've mishandled all the information so poorly, or this file so poorly, that now people are going to demand even more transparency. So if you're concerned 6 months ago when you were saying, no, nothing to see here, don't worry about it, every time a new Globe and Mail story hit, it was like, that's not true, it's inaccurate, don't worry about it, don't sweat it. Now, the transparency bar is so high because people are looking at this with a fine-tooth comb. And so is there partisanship? Of course there are. The government, the Liberal government has mishandled this in such a bad way that the opposition parties are completely against it. And by the way, in terms of a public inquiry, right, like it's not just Conservatives that are asking for this. Like I remember after Mr. Johnston brought his interim report in, it was like the Toronto Star, Conservative, Bastion, Toronto Star. You know, this report is garbage. We need a public inquiry. Like everybody, a lot of people across this country are saying we need more transparency than this. And so to your point, Arthi, I'm asking and I'm begging the government to get control of this. Their process has lost credibility, and it is too important to mess up. If we go into the next election campaign with any doubts about the integrity of our election campaigns and the counting of our votes or what has happened with regard to foreign interference, we are headed down a really slippery path. And what they are doing right now is not working. And the Prime Minister, it looks like, intends to just drive through this, just like he intended to drive through 6 or 8 months ago when he said it was racist to raise these comments, just when he said all the Globe stories were wrong. And now it's time to get serious. Whether Mr. Johnson's the right man or the right person or not to do this, he has to get control of it, and he has to start doing better work. He can't come to Canadians and say, oh, I didn't have that piece of information, or I was looking at there's an ocean of information, and I only was looking at a lake. You're in charge. Look at it all and make some recommendations right away.
I cannot tell you how much I value all of your opinions on this. So thank you so much for joining us today. That is Conservative strategist Jason Leader in Montreal, Liberal commentator Carleen Verheyen in Ottawa, and NDP commentator Raj Sahota in Vancouver. Thank you again to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arthi.